Okay, you're recording, Pam.
Okay, thank you. It is the June 29th, 2020 school board workshop at 6 p.m. and I will call this meeting to order. I will take roll call of board members. Mr. Christensen?
I am here.
Holly Tower is not with us this evening. Mr. Bryant?
You're muted, Jim.
I read his lips. He
Mr.
said he
Bryant?
was here.
Are you here?
I'm here. I'm here. Got unmuted finally.
Ms. Fair?
Here.
Ms. Jones?
Here.
Mr. Derricks?
Here.
And chair is here. So we have 6 members present with the absence of Ms. Tower. Do we rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance together? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Jeannie, do you still have the mission in front of you to share?
No, but I can try to find it quick.
Oh, I have it right here.
Okay.
Sorry. The mission of the Red Wing Public Schools is to educate and inspire all students as they realize their full potential and become respectful, responsible, and productive citizens. All right, so the agenda for tonight is the update on distance learning for this fall in the 2021 school year. Does anybody else, any other discussion items that we need to add to our agenda?
Madam Chair, you really can't add to a special meeting anything. If this is what's on the agenda, that's all you can do.
Right.
Right.
Well, number 2 says discussion items, so I wanted to make sure we were covering everything. All right, so I will turn it over to Mr. Anderson, Superintendent Anderson, who will give us a review and the summary and overview report of the evaluation survey as well. And if you are not talking, if you could mute, that would be really helpful. I think I'm getting a lot of feedback too. So I will mute as well and turn it over to the superintendent.
Great, thank you, Pam. And I'm glad that we were able to discuss distance learning and other fall opening options today. So that we can make adjustments in what we might be thinking moving forward. So it worked out really well. What I'll do is just really briefly cover some of the key issues or key decision points that we need to look at over the next couple of months before we open our doors. And I'm not sharing all of the details at this time, because I'd rather have the school board talk about some of the really big discussion topics that will occur towards the end of the meeting. So clearly we're glad to share all the details with committees or with the full board. But just another note that they're constantly changing as we develop our plans. First, there are 2 documents that were attached coming from the state. They both are giving us guidance as far as what this fall might look like. And essentially, the districts have been asked to prepare for 3 different scenarios. One scenario would be bringing back all kids into the school setting unless they request remote learning. And in that case, we would want to provide as much social distancing and other health-related practices as possible to reduce the spread of COVID. A second scenario would be students participating in online learning. It would be somewhat similar to distance learning this past spring. But of course, we want to upgrade that as we move into the school year. The third scenario would be a hybrid. So it might be some days in school, some days out of school. The important thing to remember there is that the state is asking us to consider hybrid programming that would be no more than 50% of capacity in a room or a building at a given time. So that's sort of the key criteria there. With all of the options, the state did indicate that students would be able to choose an online learning option. So even if everyone is back in school, if there's a parent with a child with health concerns or other concerns, they would have the ability to take online learning that we would provide. So those are the three scenarios that we're supposed to plan for. In late July, the state will give additional guidance that might tell us exactly what they expect on the first day of school, or they might just give additional guidance as far as specifics. You know, we just don't know what that's going to look like for sure. The most critical part or the complicated part is that the state has also told us that we need to prepare to be in any of the scenarios at the beginning of the year or throughout the year. So theoretically, we could start with one scenario and then the next week start in another and then go back or do a third. So, you know, they are building flexibility into, you know, these scenarios. And it might be school by school, class by class, or district by district. It could be the whole state. So in other words, we need to have a lot of flexible planning in place so that we can provide the best product possible depending on circumstances. All right, so any questions about kind of the overall expectations from the state?
Actually, Carson, if I could just quickly, I guess I'm just wondering, maybe you'll touch on this. It sounds like everybody has to do this very individually as a district. Like, is that true? I mean, is there really no option to be coordinating with other districts to kind of have, you know, everybody's staff working almost together for different scenarios or trying to help each other? It just seems like, I guess it just is odd to me that districts aren't working more together.
Yeah, I know in Red Wing State. Yeah, we do. You know, I've been chatting with some of the superintendents in the Goodhue County Ed District, and certainly Sherry Johnson, who works with, you know, all 6 member schools. In addition, I've been part of weekly or every other week meetings with the superintendents from the Big 9, so that we can at least share our ideas and you know, ask questions, get examples, you know, those kinds of things. And then I was part of this national virtual conference where I could meet with superintendents from across the country and learn, you know, what other folks are doing. And they based a lot of their work on what schools in Europe are actually experiencing as we move forward into the next phase. So we've been sharing a lot of resources back and forth and a lot of ideas.
Okay.
By far, the bulk of the ideas that are presented tonight are definitely specific to Red Wing. And you know, one thing we have to recognize is that not all schools will be the same, even in Minnesota. There could be school districts in the northwestern part of the state that may not have any COVID cases for months. And so they're going to be more likely to be in school because of that. Whereas other schools may have cases that show up or an outbreak or something, and then they're going to lean more towards distance learning. We also don't know what the state's going to say in late July. And so, you know, right now we're just doing all the planning, and then we'll hear from the state if we all have to do the same thing, or if each school district can decide, or what criteria will be used to make that decision for each school district.
All right, thanks.
So, yeah. Any other questions?
Harlan here. Looking at the 3 scenarios from the state that we're asked to look at, which would be regular school, hybrid, or distance learning, I guess it's a question that I don't think we can answer today, but I think it's a question that needs to be addressed is where does our fall sports and other activities fall in with this whole process in each scenario? So do we have sports if we can only do option one? What do we do if we're in a hybrid? To me, I think that's a big item, and I know people will be upset with me saying this, but I really hate to see us spend a lot of money on fall sports if it doesn't look like we're going to be able to carry them out. So I'm just going to leave it at that.
Yeah, and I'll quickly respond to that. I know that the personnel committee has talked about the possible hiring of fall coaches, but we're going to wait until July or even August to do that. And there'll be the understanding that if we do hire coaches, the pay may not be the full amount of pay because if they're not actually coaching kids in the fall, then they won't get paid as much, obviously. However, with head coaches in particular, there's a lot of work that happens, during the year, especially the summer before the season. And so perhaps there could be, $500 for a head coach to pay for that extra work. And then we'll have to decide, what happens depending if it's hybrid or part of the season is off. In terms of games, I'm really hoping the state can provide very clear direction in that because these are inter-school activities. And so obviously something we do is going to impact offset, for example, and vice versa. So I'm expecting some pretty clear guidance from there.
All right. Part of my question is what happens if the state allows us to, I'm just going to use this to open as a regular school, and it's working in certain districts, but in our district, all of a sudden we have to go to online learning only or hybrid. Where does that put us in the whole sports scene? Because we, in the past, have not done any sports or gone to a game if we have bad weather. Where does this fit into this whole thing? Because they're talking like you might start one way and then switch to another and switch to another, and you got to be prepared to switch to all of them. We need to have a plan where the sports fit into that. That's all I'm saying. We need to have a plan where that fits.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no question about it. And Paul Hartman has been working with other activities directors to see if there can be some commonalities in planning. Any other questions in a general sense before I start talking specifics? Well, how about if I just jump in then, and I'll briefly give summaries and the key issues for food services, buildings and grounds, technology, personnel, teaching and learning. But I'm hoping that we can spend perhaps 3/4 of our time together talking about transportation and structural options. And I'll explain why when we get to those points. But let me just briefly go over the food service planning. The big issue for us to consider is should students eat in classrooms if we're doing in-person learning or hybrid option. Some schools are still having their students go to the cafeteria. Some are planning to have the students eat in classrooms. Right now, we're operating under the assumption that all students will eat in their classrooms because we want to minimize the number of interactions in the hallways, the bathrooms, and especially the cafeteria. The last thing we want is for 200 kids to be sitting, cafeterias together at the same time. So right now, that's our operating assumption that we will be providing food in classrooms. Of course, if we do that, then there's some resulting questions about, how can food be delivered to students in the classrooms? Do we have staff members that drop it off? Do the kids get excused for 5 minutes to go pick up the food and then take it back to the classroom? I mean, there's a lot of questions there that Brent Lexfold is working on with principals and other food service staff. But I just wanted to highlight that that's our operating assumption, is that kids will be eating in classrooms to minimize the interactions between kids and staff members. And when I say that, I have 2 pages of much more specific information about food services. I'm not going to go over it now because, again, I want to focus on the last 2 items. But I know Brent is looking at different menu options depending on if we're in person or hybrid option. I've already talked about the location of the meal service. He has some ideas as far as changing the kitchen flow and how service lines work, including adding plexiglass, maybe changing to a different kind of pin pad so that kids don't have to touch the touchpad. He and Alan have been looking at how to dispose of waste if food is served in the classrooms. So he's talking about different containers and garbage cans, those kinds of things. And then we're also talking about how to distribute water to kids if we don't have our drinking fountains open. So just in a quick summary, I just want you to know that Brent is doing a lot of planning in terms of more of those specifics, assuming that kids are in the building and that we're serving in the classroom. So that's the brief summary. If we had Brent going here, he'd probably talk for at least an hour, and it would be one of the most engaging discussions you've ever had because he's very creative, thinking of different possibilities, and so I'm glad he's in charge trying to figure this out. Any quick questions about food service, or can I move on?
I have one quick question. What does it feel like in terms of personnel for food service workers? Would we be able to keep everybody working?
It will depend. If it's in person, then yes. If it's a hybrid, then maybe. And if it's distance learning, it's a maybe. And it's all going to depend on funding streams. So if the state does this fall what they did this past spring, then I know for sure that we can maintain our full staff if that's what we choose. If the state continues to indicate that we cannot use paraprofessionals to deliver food when we have distance learning, then we may have to hire some people depending on how many we need for those different bus routes. So it totally depends. Any other questions about food services? Again, I'm thinking that maybe operations could look at more detailed planning and or the full school board could look at it in July because I think it's really important information to share. The second item has to do with buildings and grounds. Once again, we have some leaders in that department who have been on top of this. I'm thankful that they, along with other administrators, obviously anticipated much of this, and so they placed some orders for some equipment and supplies earlier than a lot of school districts did. So we have a better chance of receiving those items. The big issue there is, will we need additional or fewer custodians for the upcoming school year? If we have distance learning, we would need fewer, but we have a strong staff right now, so we want to keep them as long as they're working on things that we need. If we're in person, we believe that we're going to have much different cleaning plans. We may need to bring some night custodians to work during the day so we can go through rooms to disinfect during the day between classes or maybe at noon or something like that. And so really that's the big issue for buildings and grounds. I know Alan and Kevin have been working on, the different kinds of machines that are needed for disinfecting, different cleaning routines, disinfecting routines, assignments, signage, where to put excess furniture if we're moving furniture out of elementary classrooms, how students are going to line up before the day begins, and how they can go from place to place within the building. And so, yeah, I feel good where we are in terms of planning for the buildings and grounds. Do you have any questions about that offhand? We were also blessed that we were able to keep our custodians employed since March 13th. So we've been able to do a lot of the summer cleaning earlier in the process, and so they've been focused on preventative maintenance work, continued cleaning as we, you know, we still provide cleaning services for, you know, anyone who's in the building at a given time. Technology
Kirsten?
department.
Oh,
Sure, go ahead.
I'm not sure where this fits, but are we taking temperatures of students and staff? And if so, do we have enough thermometers? I know that's been a concern about supplies and availability. Somebody mentioned, should the state be stepping in and do some pre-vetted vendors lists? Where does that fit in our discussion tonight?
Yeah, right now we are planning to take temperatures for students and staff as they enter the building. And so, you know, they've identified, you know, the number of thermometers needed. Perhaps even more critical is who will take those temperatures. And so they're working on that plan. I will say that we're going through a transition because Chris Clausen has retired. And so Joni Gorman has joined us. She's very knowledgeable, and you know, Chris is so good as far as being willing to work with Joni, share information, and you know, be available for additional help. So, you know, despite that turnover, I'm confident that we'll have a good plan. There are some really innovative ways of taking temperatures and finding ways for kids to wash their hands. And so we are looking at some equipment possibilities there. I don't think there will be a recommendation from us to purchase this equipment unless there's a strong need or the board really wants it. But I'll give you one example. Mike Frunk from Albert Lee, a superintendent there, you know, is exploring a possibility where there can be these thermal sensors built into existing security systems. And so as kids walk through the door, it takes thermal images. And then if someone shows up as a red ring over their head, then they're pulled aside. And then those people, you know, will have their temperature taken a second time. And I saw just a real brief demo of the product. It's very impressive. My guess, though, for Red Wing Public Schools, it's probably a $50,000 expense. And so I'm not sure if it would be the right thing to do or a good thing to do. But if it is, then you know, we'll really have to decide if that's worth the cost or not. So we're looking at some of those things as well.
All right, thank you.
The big negative with taking temperatures is there'll be long lines. You know, even if it's a quick process, it's going to be long lines, even if we have 8 or 10 entrances at the high school open. It will not be an easy thing. Now, other schools like go ahead.
Oh, this is the kind of thing like, well, okay, we can't afford it. Well, so, I mean, here's like, we need help. This is extra expense. We're trying to keep people safe. And so I'm back to like, so what is the conversation on the federal level? And I understand there might be some hope there of additional money coming, but it seems this is the type of thing when we're talking about large populations of our kids across the nation, that makes sense to me that, you know, at the federal level, everybody needs this support. I mean, we don't all have that kind of, you know, we didn't know. This is an unplanned, didn't know. We need to catch up. We need to keep people safe. So anyway, I just, I'm really interested in that conversation about how we do this and how we assure our community that we're going to, you know, do this safely to the best of our ability. And so thanks for the discussion.
I think Janie had her hand up.
No, thanks. And this is, and I know this is great that we're all having, like, I think this is going to be a long discussion, obviously, the whole night. Like, again, I don't know where this comes in, but I think at some point we're going to have to maybe just have that very blunt discussion of, like, how are we going to make this safe, but also not have it be like prison, if that makes sense. And I totally get where Heidi's coming on the temperatures and stuff, and I don't want to discredit safety and stuff like that. But I also want to make sure parents and kids also feel, comfortable and taken care of. And I know, my kids went to the dentist the other day and they had to take the temperature when they went in the door. So it's happening, and I think people will be used to that. But I guess I'm just really concerned about also just being very sensitive to our kids, and that they're still very young, and that we still need to make school a happy, joyful place to be. And I know that sounds very like, yay for, just very optimistic, but I mean, that really concerns me, that like where kind of the the levels or the discussion's going to be about how do we still make school normal and a place that's not going to be waiting in lines and getting in. So we can maybe talk about that later too, but I just wanted to bring it up because I don't know where that will be in this, but that really concerns me. And that's what I'm hearing from parents, is that they don't, they might choose to stay home or do alternative things if there's too many parameters on actually getting into the school. And I don't know if that's something we decide or the state of Minnesota is going to decide. I mean, I have a feeling it's probably going to be the state of Minnesota, but I just wanted to bring that up there because I'm hearing that from other parents, and I know as a parent that, concerns me too, of, how kids are going to feel, with strangers doing this and different things. So that's all.
Yeah, definitely there's a balance. Unfortunately, school will not be normal, regardless of the scenario chosen. It will be different than that we've done in the past. But you're right, Janie, we need to find a balance, because, we don't want, kids to feel like they're imprisoned or, get frustrated because they aren't, learning how they should be learning. But at the same time, we really do need to limit the interactions between kids, especially those who might be sick with it. So, but that's, going to be part of the planning process here, is what can we do that will still make kids want to be coming to school every day. And by the way, there are other temperature taking options that we've unearthed over the past couple of weeks. And so we'll definitely look at other options, not just the thermal imaging option. And there might be something that's even better than that. And so we'll come up with that as well. I think Pam raised her hand.
Arlen's before me.
Thank you, Pam, Madam Chair. I don't know. I know you mentioned that we were concerned about maybe thermal imaging if it's 50,000. We really don't know what these temperature devices are, but I just want to go on record right away saying I fully support us buying that type of equipment that's simple and less intrusive for our students to enter our school. And whether we have something going on right now or even looking into the future, I actually think that would be a good thing to monitor our students all the time going forward. Once we're through this pandemic, it still would be good. I would like to know my grandchildren, when they come to school, that other children are not sick. Well, how do you determine that? Well, temperature is one of these things we're looking at. The drawback being, if you do this at the school, it still doesn't address temperature prior to getting on the bus. But at least, if the student went to school yesterday, their temperature was in line when they were in school yesterday. Or, well, if it's 3 days ago, if we're doing on a 3-day rotation, you won't have that stuff. But I really think this idea of thermal imaging or something similar, that our students go in a specified door and they stand, if they have to stand on a footprint for a moment and then continue on, is not that intrusive. And I think I am in full support of spending what's necessary within reason for doing that. I know there's other places doing it. I suspect if there's any big sports leagues going on. They're going to have this in place. I think the casinos have this in place, at least some of them do. And as this gets going, unless it gets to be a shortage of supply, once it's figured out, it should go down in cost to develop this as we go forward. But I really think we need to look seriously at having something of this type in the school rather than just stop everybody and take their temperature with a infrared light or whatever you're going to do. I think this would be a better way.
Well, and if I could just add to that, one of the things that just kind of crept up into my mind is really using our community resources and partnering with our community in figuring out some of these questions. Jeannie just put possible fundraising opportunity. You know, with Goodhue County Health, maybe they've got some ideas. I also know, you know, when the pandemic first started, I worked for Mayo Clinic, and we were encouraged to take all of our temperatures at home before we even left for the morning. And those were just inexpensive thermometers that we had here, that we were provided with, if we didn't already have one. So, you know, maybe there's something that we can learn, or partner with Mayo Clinic in terms of getting the needed equipment that we can use. The other thing is, you know, and I know we've already talked about this, maybe not today yet, but, you know, really partnering with our parents and our guardians on figuring out, you know, if your child is questionable, we really don't want them getting on the bus. Because if we've got 13 or 20 kids on a bus, even though they're socially distanced, you know, just the way kids you know, where their hands are, talking on the bus, you know, masks or not masks, you know, I just see a lot of problems. And I know we're going to talk about transportation here in a minute, and that's going to be a huge discussion, but we need to know probably before they get to the building what their temperature is. And also, if any of you have been to the doctor lately and down in Mayo, they have a really great system set up for taking your temperature as you come in. It's not even, they don't even touch it to your forehead. They just kind of come close. And it's about a 15-second thing and off you go. So again, utilizing our community resources and partnering with folks to help us come up with some really great innovative ways, I think would be important.
I think Jim is next.
Thank you. Good discussion. I'm kind of like you. I'm looking forward to seeing what the bus options are. It's not me.
Why are you
so,
bringing this? Did I give you
I
that?
understand. I understand the.
My Washington D.C.
Yeah, Grandpa and I gave it to you, so we've already seen it, goofball.
Not me. Somebody please mute.
Anne Marie needs to mute.
Anne Marie, mute.
Sorry, that was my granddaughter.
That's no problem. They need attention too. No, I just think it's good discussion to have, but realistically, we don't know what's going to happen for another 3 to 4 weeks when the state kind of gives us more parameters. And I'm open to anything to have a discussion on to make our schools as safe as possible. We're not sure if we're even going to have school. We don't know if we're going to have every other day. We don't know if all it's going to be, everybody's going to be in school. So I know we need, and I think you're planning and all that process, but end of the day, you know, we can have the discussion today, but it could change in another week or two, and we have to be prepared for that.
Sounds good. Let me jump to the next topic, technology department. I think the key issue here is, should the school district implement a one-to-one technology initiative regardless of the scenarios implemented? And the administrative team is planning to recommend a one-to-one initiative for this upcoming school year. However, the implementation of that initiative will vary depending on which scenario we're following. So, for example, a one-to-one initiative at the elementary level if we're in the building at a given time, we may just keep the technology in the building. So we don't have elementary kids moving from, taking the devices from the building and home and back, because we don't think that they would be used as we would want them to at home necessarily, and then kids are forgetting them and those kinds of things. However, of course, if we have a distance learning or hybrid option, then we would likely just have the elementary kids keep the technology devices at home. So we're doing, this will be a big shift for us. We had planned to eventually do a one-to-one initiative, but I'd hope to take a year or two to kind of define it. But we realize that we need to do something sooner rather than later. So we're working towards that, knowing that the school board may have different ideas, but at least that's what we're assuming. I think Janie had raised her hand.
Oh, goodness. Thanks so much. Of course, I guess I just want to ask, what is the idea on the bring your own device? I mean, I think we did a good job of really helping the people that needed help and needed devices. And I'm just wondering, for those families that can provide their own Chromebook, is that going to be an option? Because I just feel like during these financial times, I really worry about having the resources to be able to pay for a Chromebook for every one of our students. So can you maybe talk about what the plan is for that?
Sure. And we just talked about that late last week with the technology team. The preference, at least, that came out of that meeting. And by the way, we're talking about these kinds of things in smaller teams, but then we'll take it up to the administrative team for further discussion, and sometimes kick it back to these planning teams. And of course, the school board makes the ultimate decisions. So we just talked about it at the planning team level. And the belief is that we think it's actually better if every child was issued a school Chromebook, because we can control the device, we can support the device, we can monitor the device more readily, those kinds of things. And so, but that was just the initial conclusion. We haven't gone through the whole process yet, and I'm sure that will go through the school year or to the school board for a final decision. Think, Mike?
Yeah, I just can you tell us how much Chromebooks cost? And do we have an idea of the attrition rate we might have if we allow people to take them home? I'm sure some wouldn't be coming back or wouldn't be in working condition, so we need to think about those costs.
Yeah, definitely. One thing is that we have enough Chromebooks now for everyone. They're not necessarily new touchpad Chromebooks. But if we eliminate most of our computer labs, we have enough Chromebooks. We plan to give the elementary kids, grades K through 4, maybe K through 5, the touchpad Chromebooks, because they're easier to use than just the key only Chromebooks. And then we would migrate, those older Chromebooks in the elementary schools up to the middle school and high school. So we already have enough Chromebooks. Like Mike said, there's definitely costs associated with doing it, and those are some of the areas that we want our tech team to analyze carefully. For example, do we encourage families to take out insurance policies, or do people who can afford it, pay us 10 or 20 bucks a year, we pool the money, and then we make those fixes with the Chromebooks. The tech department has, I think, a pretty good idea as far as how those Chromebooks will be handled by students, just because we had them for 3 months. But I think we need to wait to hear directly from them. Another big issue is charging stations, cases for the Chromebooks, and protection plans like for screen breakages and things like that. I missed who had their hand raised next. Sorry.
Arlen, you're up.
Sorry, I had to unmute here. We're dealing with technology and this falls into it a little bit, I guess. Have we ordered our CNC machines for our shop and stuff like that? If we haven't, or if there's a way to divert it, it seems to me to make sense. And as much as I'm a proponent, and I think everybody knows it, on upgrading our shop equipment, this may be a time when it might be more advantageous to invest our money in Chromebooks and that type of thing and get the CNC machine a year from now or something to help control our budget. And I'm just going to look at putting that out. So thank you.
Yeah, we did order the CNC machines and and it's here. It's installed. I'm not sure if it's operating yet, but I know it's installed. So the technology purchases, though, were part of the referendum plan. We just accelerated the purchase of those Chromebooks. So instead of waiting another year, to fully implement it, we bought some earlier so we could implement it sooner rather than later. And I think it makes sense because I think there's a good chance that for at least part of the year, we'll be in distance learning and/or hybrid learning, unfortunately. Not by our choice necessarily, but just I think with realities we're facing. Any other questions about technology? Let me jump to personnel. I really don't have much to share here, except we're closely monitoring what the state and the federal governments are telling us in terms of allowing staff members to miss work due to a legitimate COVID-related reason. But this is one of my top two concerns. Will we have enough staff members who are able to work on a given day if kids are in the building? Some school districts are expecting, or many school districts are expecting about 5 to 10% of their staffs, and that could be teachers, classroom assistants, custodians, about 5 to 10% who will not be able to work. So if you do the math here, that's about 20 to 40 employees we may need to find substitutes for, or just not replace, or find people to replace them. So anyway, that's one big issue and concern for me. We are sending out a survey to staff members to kind of gauge where people are feeling with this process, so that we know kind of where people stand. With teachers and paraprofessionals, there might be the option of allowing them to work remotely with the kids who have chosen a remote option, for the whole year. It is not an easy option for those people because our expectations are going to increase compared to last spring. The class sizes might be larger if there are some online classes. The expectations for our paraprofessionals will be higher as well because we want to provide one-to-one help as much as possible, but we're at least planning into that.
So could I ask you, Karsten, a couple of my questions were, you spoke to increased expectations, and I think that's appropriate. So, what is our staff preparedness? I mean, how are we supporting them to be better prepared to be online instructors? What are the consistency of expectations? Because I've kind of heard some different things about some people are great, others have struggled, others maybe just not delivering what we thought, but we're trying to give each other a little bit of grace in this transition that was totally unexpected and just a real novel turn of events. Can you speak to that about how are we getting people ready for a hybrid or a reopening of some kind? What is that? Do you have any more definitive action plan right now about what that might look like?
I can give you, I don't have the full action plan on paper in front of me, but I know that Jess Whitcomb and the principals have been discussing these issues. I'll give you a couple of examples. I know that Tierney Brothers will be coming in to provide training for teachers and I think paraprofessionals on how to better use Google Classroom, including a component that allows for more conversations to take place on a given day. So that's one example of the training that will be offered this summer. We're excited about that because I think that could address a lot of the expectations. In terms of consistency of expectations, I believe that the state will be giving very clear criteria that each teacher needs to do on a regular basis in the classroom. And if they don't give enough expectations, then we will fill that gap. And so there's been some discussion about making sure that there is actual, instead of just posting something and then taking in the assignments, that there'll be more synchronous learning so that teachers and students are interacting together online. Jim, I think you had a question.
Come on, there we go. Get unmuted finally. Yeah, just kind of piggyback a little bit. You just talked about your staff, the 5 to 10% on projected number that may not be in the schools if we go to in-school learning. With that, thinking ahead, has your group thought ahead as to if and when a vaccine is developed, what our legality questions are for people that attend the schools, work in the schools, or look at the vaccination that is offered, and how we address that when it becomes, if and when it becomes available.
Yeah, sure. Sure would be good news if we encounter that during this coming school year. We have not talked about that internally, but certainly if a vaccine is available next winter or spring, in the meantime, we'll be getting guidance, I'm sure, from the state in terms of how we could offer that or encourage it or require it. But we haven't gotten that far yet, Jim.
Yeah, it's just something that I'm getting way ahead of ourselves, but however that it'll come before you know it. I just shared there's a flu vaccine, and people choose to take it or get it, and some don't. So just something
right
as you're brainstorming your team down the road, as we hear more and more about it, because I think just some news today that the World Health Organization says that the spike or the I don't know if it's the worst, so more is to come. We're going to actually see more cases than we currently have. So some of what we're doing here may be, planning for not a September 1st, but a January 1st or something like that as we go forward.
Right. No, I agree. Unless there's some other personnel questions, Heidi's questions were a good segue into the teaching and learning part. I always hate it when I put the teaching and learning section as item 5, because that's why we're all here, obviously. I think this particular topic warrants a full-blown workshop just talking about this. And, my goal or our goal is that we want a product for this coming year that's going to be even better than what we had pre-COVID. So, I think that should be the expectation for all of us, is that we want to put a great product on the table. And if it's done distance, hybrid, or in person, we're going to be better than we were. And, one thing that Jess has been working on is how are we going to work with kids who will not come to school, even if school's in session. And there will be legitimate reasons, if they're kids or their parents or other people in their household who are at high risk, then there's a good chance that they will not be coming to intermingle with, 1,000 peers at the high school, for example. And Jess has been working with Goodhue County Ed District on a curriculum product that's a K-12 curriculum. For this coming year, we don't have to pay anything because we're part of a pilot project, but we can only take so many kids as part of that pilot project. I've heard good reviews of their work so far, but Jess is following up on that. That would really help our teachers provide a quality product so they aren't doing class by class or day by day creating this digital curriculum that they didn't have before. And you know, so we're hoping that that works out, but it's going to depend on how many of our kids are looking for that option. That's one of the reasons why we're surveying parents as well to see what they're thinking in terms of this fall. And then also kind of like what Heidi asked about the consistency of expectations. We've already surveyed, we had a listening session maybe about a week ago or so where people could call in and give feedback about their experience with distance learning. It was not well attended, but at least we gave the opportunity for people to share their feedback. We also had about 40 to 50 people who came to the high school in person last Monday, and there were structured feedback sessions that Jess had come up with to really solicit suggestions from parents and from staff members about what we should do differently next year. So I think if we have that full-blown board discussion just focus on this topic, I think Jess could certainly give a presentation in conjunction with a principal or two on what we're going to do differently next year. Another thing I'll mention is that we will be working with teachers union as far as what could look different this coming year. I'm thankful that we have a good working relationship with our teachers union. I know there are some unions in the state who are trying to re-bargain teacher agreements, or at least having kind of what they think is a veto power of what the school is doing. But we have none of that here. I think our union leadership and union members are willing to work with us. And that's not just true for teachers, but other groups as well. So anyway, unless there's some other questions, Pam, I think, had a question.
The only thing I was going to say, and it doesn't have to be a long discussion, but I don't want to lose it, is we had a very large discussion several meetings back on the teacher evaluation system. And I don't want to lose the fact that we're going to need to figure out a new system. We've got teachers that are still in their first 3 years on a probationary period. And so what is the evaluation system going to look like for them? And we don't have to talk about that now. I just don't want to lose that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can mention that when March 13th came around, the state directed us not to do any more evaluations that year because they didn't feel that would be fair for teachers to be evaluated in a setting that was totally new and not predicted. And so I'm very confident that the state will tell us what we need to do and should not do for this year, in particular with the probationary teachers that we have, because in a typical year, a probationary teacher gets 3 evals. So we'll have to come up with something there because of COVID. On a good note, though, again, Jess Whitcomb has been working on how to better implement our teacher evaluation system. And so I have some tentative good news in that regard, but we'll talk about that at our workshop session, I think scheduled in August. And not only teacher evaluations we'll be discussing, but just evaluations for all employees. We think we're crafting a good solution for that. Heidi?
Yeah. One of the pieces that my discussion with Minnesota Department of Education, part of a focus group, we focused on access, communications, instruction, and supports. And so my question now is under supports for teaching and learning. What does, the social emotional pieces look like? Mental health monitoring or connection with kids and assessing where they're at. supports for special needs students, even supports like, how are we doing teaching the arts classes as far as materials or ideas. So, and again, you can't probably answer all of those things, but I think those are important pieces that aren't always as visible as the classroom teacher. But I think those have come across as very important too, especially on the mental health and well-being of the whole child. So do you have anything to offer at this time about what that might look like? How is that going to be different? Or how are we doing that work given a hybrid environment or a distance learning model that is hopefully a new and improved one?
Certainly mental health is a struggle for most students and probably all school districts. It has definitely risen to the top of our list of concerns. There's no doubt about it. And everyone is going to need to make this a high priority in order to help our kids. In Red Wing in particular, we have some advantages compared to other school districts. We do have mental health therapists for 3 of our buildings. We're hoping to get a 4th one for Sunnyside this year as well, if we can find someone licensed who accepts a position. And so at least we'll have a mental health therapist, hopefully for every school. They have a working caseload that they can still work with regardless of the setting. So if it's in-person, hybrid, or online, they can still communicate directly with the kids on their caseloads. That's good. Our guidance counselors and social workers are actively engaged with students as well. And they're more focused on, well, not only mental health, but also the social emotional learning, like what you talked about. And, there'll be some additional resources from the state too. Compared to others, I think we're in good shape there, but clearly the needs are significant, for our students. And those are for the students who are even typically do really well in school and don't have some of those issues. This is a traumatic event for everyone. In terms of special education services, I really think let's wait on that discussion because that's a different ball game, and perhaps Sherry or Sonia can share their thoughts at another meeting because they're doing some planning and adjusting as well, and the expectations are very high.
Sure. All right. Thank you for that.
Well, I'll tell you what, Terry Johnson is, I believe, on the line. I know he's.
Kirsten, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but is there any way I thought I put my name up just before we go to transportation? Oh. Is it okay to piggyback on kind of Heidi's comment there?
Please do.
Sorry, I just kind of a question on, on manipulatives and kind of using different things to teach our kids. I'm like many other of us that are parents, we try to keep our kids off of screens as much as we can. And there was not a lot of, whether it even be just book reading. Like, can you maybe share with us any kind of discussion or creativity about trying to get kids more hands-on or reading out of a book rather than reading on a computer, or trying to do big, again, I know we're throwing a lot at you, but, creative ways of having, maybe neighborhood gym times or just different things. I just really feel like we have to be sensitive to how much time our kids were looking at a screen this spring. And I know for all kids, it just was really hard, just like it is for us as adults. So I just hope that we're being, and I'm sure we are, but I hope we're looking at other ways to bring things in that are more hands-on rather than on the screen.
Yeah, I completely agree. I know there were some Red Wing Arts and some other arts organizations in town were planning to develop arts kits because not everyone has the markers and the art paper at home. And so I imagine that might be resurrected for this fall. And we could distribute those kits to parents here or to kids in school. They can take home. If we start with distance learning, we can drop it off at the summer food program. There are all sorts of ways of doing that. And so I would hope that might be one way that community members could really become involved in providing some needed manipulatives for other areas as well. I remember Doug Barlow, I think, or maybe it was John Jones, I can't remember who, but asked me, this past spring if they could actually have their kids work on their cars at home or do other kinds of things like that. And unfortunately, I was really worried about something happening at home, and so we said no to that. But in the end, we want kids to be working with their hands if they're at school or if they're at home. And just looking at a screen is not good enough. There's no doubt about that. But I wrote a note. I'm sure Jess Whitcomb's on the line, and so we'll talk about some of those possibilities with manipulatives, as a team. It's a good suggestion.
Well, and have other districts talked about like giving more books, again, just books to read and such like that? And I'm fine, you getting back to us, I get it. But I just think even reading on a piece of paper is so different than reading off of the screen. So whether it's more packets or whatever, like, I just think that's really important. So thanks for addressing that.
I have not heard that, but I think it's a really good suggestion. And so, Jess and Meg Lahammer, I'm sure can take a look at some of those possibilities too. Well, why don't we jump to transportation? There's some things keeping me up at night, but this is the most frequent. And unless Terry Johnson has some updated information, the latest I've heard from First Student is that they believe that only 13 students can be transported on their full-size buses at a given time in order to be in accordance with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention guidelines.
That's still the same.
That's what I was afraid you'd say. This is a major barrier. Now, it's not just for our school. It would be for every school in the country. How are we going to get kids to school safely on buses? And so a few of us did meet a week ago or maybe 2 weeks ago to talk about this issue. I did get some numbers as far as how many people typically sign up for transportation services. We average about 70 kids on a bus, or at least signed up for the bus, and we need to get it down to 13 unless something changes in that process. So I'll throw out some examples of the transportation things we can do, and then that will lead into some structural options that we may need to consider. We could have different starting and ending times for different schools, kind of go back to the 2-year or the 2-tier system, where we have elementary kids, for example, riding on buses, and then high school kids get picked up, at a later time. And, my concern with that is that it completely disrupts, people's schedules throughout the district. But that would be one way to help reduce the number. Even if we did that, we have a lot more than 13 kids, per bus at a given time. We could increase our no bus zones. Currently, they're 1 mile for elementary, 1.5 for middle school, and 2 miles for high school. Even if we increase that to a 2-mile no bus zone, we still aren't close to reaching 13 kids per bus. We can encourage more of our buses to have shorter routes, try to get as many double routes as possible. Right now, we have, I think, 3 of those double routes already built in the system. We could try to increase that. That helps a little bit. One big area that we want to look at is determining how many parents are willing to drive their own children to school and possibly take others to school. And that could be a significant reduction in ridership. And Also, we'd like to determine how many parents are likely to use the distance-only option that they will have in the year. And so that could also reduce how many people need transportation. But even if we did all those things, we are not down to 13 per bus. I will tell you that right now. So I don't know if you have any, I think Jim just raised his hand if you have a question.
Well, I didn't raise my hand. I'm not in school anymore, but I did put in my name in the chat. But yeah, you just go backwards. Let's go back to what you were saying earlier, before transportation. There's going to probably be some students that are going to do e-learning.
Mm-hmm.
Some that are probably maybe not want to come for different reasons. Have we done any surveys or asked on our Facebook or website for input from parents that have students? One, are they going to attend? Two, are they going to take the bus? And three, if they aren't taking the bus, how are they going to get to school? That might get us down to a number that we're at least know, instead of assuming that we have the same number of kids this coming year that we did have last year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do have a survey that's going out either tonight or tomorrow that asks those questions as well as some other questions as well. So that's one, those are pieces of information that will be really important for us as we continue to plan.
Is there, piggyback, is there any other groups out there, public health, social service, that could help get that information to people that don't just look at our website, or if we're mailing them, or is there other ways to the new media to encourage people to give us their thoughts on the transportation issue and what they're anticipating with the three scenarios that were being discussed tonight?
Yes, certainly, you know, some social media avenues. There could be one-to-one phone calls from school staff to the parents who don't respond to the survey, and there's some other possibilities too. Yeah, and we need to explore that because we need, you know, we can't have, you know, people make a commitment because they might change their mind over the next 2 months, but we need to have a rough idea of where we stand with transportation numbers and some other things. Janie had a question, and then we'll go to Jess Whitcomb, who has some information.
Well, I think my question will go right into Jess's, but yeah, as you were talking before, and as Jim was talking, I just felt an urgency to have a survey and some very specific details from all of our families, which is going to be quite a process. So I'll just go maybe right to Jess to get more of that information, but.
Go ahead, Jess.
Hi, I just wanted to let you all know that in utilizing Lisa Hanson and i3 Works, they're the data consultants that we have. We went to them to ask, here's the rough sketch of our survey. Here's what we would like to get out of it, exactly what you guys are talking about, the transportation questions and conversations, so we can start planning. So they asked us to add a couple of things, and then we're also adding the oldest child's name in your family so that we can track who has and hasn't filled out the survey, so that we know. So say that everybody in the Twin Bluff area didn't fill out the survey, so we'll have no idea about busing needs there. We'll be able to then circle back once we get the first round. Then we'll be able to have some tactics like Jim was talking about, so that we can actually one-to-one make sure that all of our families are being surveyed.
Is that a time too, Jess and Carson, that we should be asking about kind of the one-to-one Chromebook and some technology questions? Is that included on there? I think you said that, but you know, just so that while we have people, because I know summer will get going quickly, but is that something that was added to, is technology and kind of what needs are with that?
So we asked, actually we utilized our paras really well at the beginning of distance learning, and every single family got either 1 or 4 phone calls to ask what are their technology needs. So the technology department, and led by Kevin and Meg LaHammer, we really know where we need the hotspots and who needs them and who has a Chromebook and who made it work for a little while and now needs a Chromebook that's going to persist. So the technology needs, we really utilize people just calling because we really had to know that before distance learning. Do you guys have any other questions about the survey?
That's going out tomorrow, Jess, is that correct, or tonight?
Either tonight or tomorrow.
Thanks.
Yep, Jess worked on that survey and then shared it with i3Works. I didn't want to send out the survey until we had this workshop session. And then we'll be spending a few days this week trying to compile info before the 4th. So I think I don't see any more people with questions or comments. Terry, if you're on the line, do you have anything to add or suggest?
Would you want me to go over what we've talked about, the things that I pretty much I can't do from the Department of Transportation that I've talked to you? Do you want me to kind of go over that, or?
You know, maybe if you could do it like in 1 to 2 minutes, that'd be fine.
Okay, so one of the things that we cannot do is we cannot have disinfectants or cleaners on the buses while we're transporting students. So if we were to disinfect in between going to the schools, we'd have to do it back at our base, because Department of Public Safety says that we can't have those things on there, and I don't think they're going to be moving on that. And we cannot make any kind of modifications to our buses either. So if there's like any barriers that we've ever thought about, that can't happen either. That's just the Department of Public Safety, the guidelines. One of the things with the disinfecting, though, is our parent company is out of the UK, and we handle the light rail and the busing in Europe. And they are currently using a viricide that has a 30-day residual on it. So if we sprayed those with the buses once a month and then just did daily, follow-up in the common areas, high-touch areas, that'd be a lot easier for us. But there's certain things that we can't do because we're guided by the Department of Education, but then all of a sudden we're guided by the Department of Public Safety. So, and then I know that they talked about the temperatures on getting onto the bus. That is something that we highly do not recommend. First of all, loading and unloading, the loading time is a very dangerous time for the students when they're getting onto the bus. Driver would need to give their full attention to what's going on around them. It would lead to a longer time of loading. So the whole time we have to have the stop arm out there, and the way people blow past the stop arms, I think there'd be a lot of frustration. We'd probably have more of that. And also another issue that we'd have with it is, if we got a kid who came up, say he's a first or second grader, he has a fever, parents aren't there, do I send them back to the house? I'm not sure if the parents are there. And then, we tried that a couple times, where we had sick kids and we can't get a hold of the parents. So those are my concerns on those ends. But that's pretty much it for me right now. And
Thank you, Terry. So this is one issue that we're working not only with Terry, but also with the Center for School Efficiencies. They're the ones who do all of our routing for us. And they're providing data in terms of current numbers. So if we could jump to, Heidi, sorry. Go ahead.
Jim's
Okay.
first, I think.
Yeah, or maybe
Actually-
Arlen, then Jim, and then Heidi.
Oh,
Before me.
yep.
Arlen and Heidi.
All right, if I could maybe just ask a couple questions here on transportation. One would be, I respect that we can't carry disinfectants or whatever on the bus for use, but does it make any sense to have a cleaning station at each school that's supported maybe by our janitorial that would have the equipment to spray whatever we have to do or wipe or whatever we have to on the bus once they get to the school, because can that work? And then my other question is, I think our contract is dictated by price per route. If we have to run multiple trips to school with a bus, how does that affect on the rate, and can that be renegotiated?
Yeah, the answer to your first question about the cleaning stations is yes. You know, if they're on school grounds, you know, we could have mobile cleaning stations or, you know, disinfectant with at least 60% alcohol, those kinds of things. And we are working towards that kind of plan. And that's the answer to the first question. Yeah, in terms of the route costs, you know, we're gonna have to figure out exactly what each specific situation is. I know when we looked at or did a cost comparison of a 1-tier to a 2-tier system, at that time there was an expectation that it would actually cost us more. You know, but some of these double routes, I don't think would cost us more as long as it's within the specified time range.
Yeah. Hey, Arlen, because the pricing is based off of a flat 3 hours that we got now anyway. So
Bus in 3 hours, is that correct? Or something?
Yeah. So there's flexibility in there. And then you know, if it looks like it's something else, that's something we can talk about in the future, but it's not based off of per route. So it's based off of hours. So maybe that'll help you feel a little bit better.
Okay. It just seemed to me to make sense that if we have to deploy the bus from a school again, that we could have a method with a van right next to where the bus parks. As soon as the kids are out, do what we have to do to turn the bus around, ready to go on our school grounds, with possibly support from our janitorial people on the materials that need to be used. And that's all. Thank you.
Jim?
Thank you. Terry, I found with interest your mention of over in the UK, some type of disinfectant, I understood, that has like a 30-day effect or a 30-day window where you spray it and it does that. That's quite interesting. With that, just maybe a question on one is, have you discussed with Karsten or anybody like face masks for occupants on the bus? And is that regulation for the public safety, is that for schools? Because I just chatted with a friend of mine who was up in northern Minnesota over the weekend, and they were going some whitewater rafting or something, and they're on a bus and he said they had partitions in there to separate people. So I was curious if there's some type of different regulations there that you're aware of.
Yeah, when it comes to the Department of Public Safety, there is actually a separate school bus division that's designated straight to schools. The charter end of it, of those people up there, is completely different. They run on completely different rules than we do. What happens is if we alter the bus in any way, it makes it takes the structural integrity away from it. And that's why they won't allow us to do those things. But yeah, it's different. School buses are completely different than any other kind of busing. So
I remember when I drove bus, they come around in Ireland, and I used to see this when we drove once or twice. I can't remember how many, but come around and they do inspections on it. So, which is a good thing. They're regulating them. It's much stricter, which is a good thing because of the valuable cargo that they're carrying. But have you discussed masks at all?
Masks is our company. Our policy in our company is we're not requiring it. That we would do whatever the school district told us to do. the drivers, it'd be left up to them whether they wanted to or not. But if it became mandated, yes, then it would happen. But right now, how it'll basically go is whatever the school board would decide. Because our company doesn't necessarily come out with the policies because we have so many districts and so many states that everything's different, that we just kind of follow along with whatever the state and the district wants us to do.
Thank you.
Terry, could you talk to your bosses at First Student to see how many kids we could fit on a bus if every child was required to wear a mask?
Yeah, that was something I was gonna, we're kind of looking, we saw that. It just depends on what their guidelines are. We read something somewhere along the lines of about a 50% capacity, possibly. But we're not positive on that. But I think that if it was a mask, I'm sure it'd probably go along with the school. I don't know though, but I know, but we can try to find out some more.
If you could, that'd be helpful. Let's see, Heidi's next and then Pam.
Well, you partially covered what I was asking about. I'm kind of with Terry here. I was looking through that large document. I thought I had seen something about, well, if you require masks on the bus for students, then your capacity would change. But I can't find that right now. And I guess that was my question about, and I know people are really sensitive to it. I guess I won't get into my personal stance, but I'll just say that I have family members with underlying conditions. And so to me, wearing masks is the least we can do to help some of my family members stay safe. And so I try to do that for the family members of other people. So that's what I was. And I'm sure you guys are going to be tracking that down between Terry and Karsten and everyone else. You're going to find that answer out. So thank you.
Your turn, Pam.
So one of the things that came up when the pandemic first hit was that we may not have enough bus drivers. So if we're running double routes or adding bus routes or whatever, because we can only have 13 kids on a bus, are we going to have enough drivers? What about bus monitors? And I guess I'll just end with those two things: monitors and drivers.
I've surveyed my drivers. Most of them are are willing to do the extra time because they get paid extra then. So that's something that I can see. Most of them have agreed to it. The monitors have been along the same lines to it too. They're kind of understanding, but then I've lost a couple drivers over this already that were older, and I'm trying to regain more people. And then one of the things that I'm just worried about is along the lines as the schools of on a daily basis, how many drivers may I need to have come in because they possibly have a temperature or something. So it's the same struggles that you guys are going through. But I've already surveyed my drivers, and it looks like there's certain drivers that wouldn't be able to do it because they have other jobs. But I should be able to accommodate the longer routes.
Well, thank you, Terry. I know we have a lot more work to do, but I know that you and First Student are working on it, and we'll come to some solutions together. Thanks, Terry.
Thanks.
All right, so the last item, thank you for going through the list relatively quickly so we could focus on this one. I believe I and the other administrative team members will be suggesting some significant structural changes. And again, the purpose of this is to minimize interactions between people. if we're in session or in a hybrid version. So one of the suggestions that will be forthcoming to you is to, instead of having 8-period days at the middle school and the high school, we would like to consider having a block system at both the middle school and the high school. And it would be called, it'd be a true block, not this A-B schedule that we've had in the past. But for example, each child would have 4 blocks of learning every day for a quarter. And then the next quarter, the child would have a different 4 set of courses. You know, hopefully we would only have to do that for first semester. Theoretically, it could be for the whole year. 2 main advantages. First of all, feedback has been clear that this distance learning is a struggle for staff members and students. Expecting, you know, students to, you know, work with 8 different classes on a given day, and for teachers to prepare and present 6 classes on a given day is very challenging. So that's one reason. The other reason is that, you know, if I'm sending a child to school in a block, you'll have interactions with, you know, kids in 4 different classes instead of 8 different classes on a given day. And so we cut the interaction in half. And that's not just with kids in the class, but it's hallway interactions, it's all those things. And so, and I know that if we move forward with it, you know, there'll be some resistance, although, you know, because we wanted the 8-period day. I mean, both George and I recommended it. It passed through the school board, but considering the circumstances, you know, I think that's one way we would like to at least strongly pursue. It would go through the board probably in July, but I wanted to give you a heads up on that. Any thoughts, questions, reactions?
I guess I had gotten some feedback, this is Heidi speaking, about, it was around special education students and how they had to check in with their special ed teacher, check in with their classroom teacher, check in with, I mean, it seemed pretty onerous to keep, you know, checking in on an online situation, even just all the multiple expectations and that we were kind of asking of kids. So it makes sense to me. I'm a little concerned about, again, the teaching style in a block where you need to keep it engaging and you need to keep changing it up every 10 or 12 minutes, do things a little differently to keep that pace from turning into kind of plodding and monotonous, especially for, certain kinds of students that need that kind of breakup. And I think even for highly focused individuals who maybe are prepared to sit and do lecture style, that still needs to be broken up with different activities. So I guess that would be my only feedback. I think it's appropriate, but I'd still like to see the support for changing up that instructional style for those teachers that need that kind of, sort of rethinking the classroom scenario.
I think Arlen is next.
Thank you. I certainly, at this point, hearing this as first I've heard of it, and my first impression is I think it has a lot of merit to consider. And I'm not sure if you're just looking at the high school or if you're looking to go farther down the line, but I don't want to be negative Nilly, but the reality of it is, to me, we are either going to be distance learning or hybrid. I cannot, in my mind, fathom in September that we're going to be ready to have all the kids come to the school at the same time. I just can't see it. And just as you said, 8 classes every day. It's not every day, it's 4 days a week, whatever it is. But I think if you're doing a block schedule and you come into a hybrid type of thing, then you got the option of every other day or possibly every third day with the hybrid. It just seems like it makes makes me want to explore it further. I just don't know how fast you need to decide it, but I think it's great. I'm full support of considering it. I think it answers a lot of questions on the high school level. It seems like to me, just off the top of my head, on cafeteria being open or in your classroom, that one period wherever in the middle of the day would happen to be lunchtime, and you would have 3 different time slots in there to eat your lunch in that classroom. If that's where it's going. The busing issue, it all looks like it would work quite a bit better at the high school going to that with where we're at and the uncertainty, and at least look at it for the first semester. I don't know how you make a switch halfway through the year, but so maybe it's something that has to be decided that it's going to be that way for the year. I'm all for looking into it further and finding the pros and cons of it. Thank you.
Janie?
Well, I'm probably going to go a different route. I'm a little bit concerned about the educational product when we talk about that. I totally understand kind of on you know, with what Heidi's points are in Arlen's and why we would consider it. I'm just, and I do understand if we were having to do distance learning and hybrid, but you know, I guess I am still hopeful that things are going to change. You know, again, being a parent, I just don't know how a hybrid is going to work. And so I guess I'm still going to be very honest that I'm very optimistic about the fall and what that might look like. And so I guess mainly my main question was, and I realize this is really hard, Carson, for all of you and pretty much everybody on this call. I'm sure everybody's head is kind of exploding right now, probably like mine is. But that's the hard thing that I'm sure the state is. I wish they'd give us more guidance. This is a lot of work to put into 3 scenarios. And so I realize that you're probably just trying to narrow things down so that, you know, whether it's in school or hybrid, that those will probably, you know, could possibly look the same. But I guess, are these recommendations from what other districts are doing too? Because I'm really concerned that we have a good educational product, which I know that's what you're saying too. And people are going to start comparing districts and comparing what they're going to be able to get from other places and other options. So I guess I just bring that up. We have to be competitive and we have to make sure, again, like I love that you're using that word product, and it sounds a little business wise, but I think that's good. But I just want, I know I'm kind of rambling, but I just am concerned that we're not going to be able to give our kids, you know, lots of offerings. And again, you know, yeah, teachers teaching for 2 hours or an hour and a half is going to be a hard thing in front of a computer.
Yeah, and you bring up valid concerns because we should, you know, always make our decisions based on what's best for student learning. The one part of it is that there's actually significant research out there saying that a block schedule is beneficial for student learning because of the relationships that teachers can form with students. So when we had the block schedule and every other day, that didn't help at all. You know, we lost that advantage because, you know, one teacher was still working with 6 groups of kids, you know, every quarter. So, you know, one teacher per, you know, 180 kids or 200 kids, depending on the grade level. And so, you know, we lost that advantage because teachers weren't able to create those relationships with kids as other places do. The one advantage to doing another advantage to doing the true block, where it's just 4 classes for 1 quarter, is that, you know, teachers will be able to develop more relationships with kids. And this is probably the most critical time in our history when that needs to happen. So, you know, it depends on how we kind of structure it and plan for it and implement it, especially implementation. But I think it could actually be a draw. I know that if I was planning to choose a school district, under these circumstances, when things could be going back and forth between types of learning, I would definitely want, you know, closer relationships with my teachers. I'd feel like I was in a better place because of that. Now, I'm saying all that. I was fully supportive of the 8-period day, you know, that George had come up with. So, but it's just these unique circumstances, and it'd just be a temporary thing, you know, for a semester or for a year. I think, if you don't mind, Jim, I think has a comment.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm glad you're looking at some different options since we're in different times. I kind of like the idea myself. Obviously, if it looks to me, just thinking through it, you got one teacher for a quarter working on one area, so you might, you kind of alluded to early on about additional costs or additional staffing or something. I didn't see that in your presentation, but I think we all learned, all heard from a number of people that the e-learning was good for some and not good for others. So having a concentrated block, 4 blocks, and each day, I think does go different than the 8 block that we all supported. But I think it's the right thing to look at now, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about it as we go into the summer here.
Yeah, and really, as far as teacher load, there would not be an additional cost in this case, because going from 8 periods to 4, it's the same cost. Just because a teacher will be teaching 4 classes a day, or 3 classes a day instead of 6. Students will be taking 4 instead of 8. So it works out, mathematically even. The one thing though is that we would want, and I'm sure we'll be able to accomplish, some sort of memorandum of understanding with teachers, so that high school teachers would not be getting 1 full block of prep time. That would be significantly more than everybody else in the district, and we need that supervision time built into the daily schedule at the high school. So we definitely pursue an MOU with the union. I'm confident we'd get it. They get it. They understand these are unique circumstances. Mike?
Yeah. So the blocks would be studying 4 subjects for one semester and then 4 subjects for the next semester?
It'd be 4 classes first quarter, a different 4 classes second quarter, and then a different 4 third, a different 4 fourth. Yeah, that's called the true block. So when blocks came into being, that was sort of the proposed model, or what everyone went for. There are negatives with it. For example, if you're gone on a 2-week vacation one quarter, well, you're going to miss 2 weeks of the same 4 classes. So that's a problem. I know that if there are students who are taking some extensive writing classes or reading classes, and they're taking 2 at a time, that can be, quite a workload. And so that's a negative. There's some questions about the college level prep classes and when you take AP exams and those kinds of things. So I'm certainly not saying, oh, the true block is the answer for the next 20 years. I just think that it's a good answer, actually a very strong answer for next year, if the admin and school board all kind of coalesce on the plan.
Well, and it would also help, or do we know if the state is planning on doing anything about its standardized testing regimen? If we've got students studying subjects at different times of the year, they're not going to be all fresh at the end of the year. I know that some colleges do 1 class at a time, and they've found it to be very successful. That's colleges, though. But I get to thinking about this, and I'm thinking maybe allow students to pick their classes and not make required classes, and let them pursue their interests in these blocks where they can really go in depth in something that they're particularly interested in. I don't know. I'm sure it wouldn't work for everybody, but as long as we're throwing everything up in the air, we might as well see where some good things can land. But yeah, is the state talking about suspending or somehow dealing with the standardized test and all the rigmarole that goes along with that?
Yeah, the federal government and the state government did not require us to take standardized tests this spring. I don't know what they'll do for next year, so we're assuming that we will be giving those assessments next spring, the MCAs. And we're also planning on giving Fast Bridge assessments at 3 times this coming year, but that's a local decision. And by the way, Mike, you brought up the other negative with a true block is that, you know, theoretically you could have a student take, let's say, a math class first quarter of your junior of his or her junior year, and then not until fourth quarter of his or her senior year. And so there's a long, you know, time gap between taking those courses. Now, I'm not sure if there's a bigger learning loss, you know, compared to doing it every other day or something like that. But that's been a concern that, you know, teachers expressed, you know, throughout the country when the true block was initially implemented.
Well, it would be like summer vacation, where, and you were speaking about the 2-week vacation that some people might take their kids on. Well, those families are probably more able to make up for whatever it is that they're missing. And they probably wouldn't be gone 2 weeks either, but.
Right. Right.
So, yeah, I just, everything is so absolutely up in the air. 13 people on a bus is not going to get anything done.
Yeah. And unfortunately, a change in the middle school and high school schedules won't address the bus situation, but it would reduce, you know, the interactions that take place, you know, within a building at one time. Our health and safety person wants us to keep all secondary kids, you know, in the same classroom, and that's just impossible because, you know, those students are taking elective courses, and so, you know, they do need to move from room to room. But even internally, we want to minimize their interaction. So we do not want lockers being used. We don't want computers being shared. We want people going into assigned entrances so that we don't have people congregating, you know, at the coffee shop or in the locker bay area, you know, those kinds of things. But the block schedule is one thing. And by the way, we would not have an advisory period either. It would be built in for 1 year just in one of the blocks. Because again, we want to decrease the interactions between kids.
Yeah, maybe no socialization allowed. In Europe, kids do stay in one classroom and teachers move from classroom to classroom. It might be more difficult with the electives, but certainly it's conceivable to have the same group of students with the same group of classes and required classes doing that.
Right.
You know, then teachers wouldn't have to decorate their classrooms and they could just get their work done. But anyway, so I was thinking maybe we should just have high school students in order to limit socialization and social interaction, have them doing theses, have them pursue a subject and do a full dissertation on what they can learn about a subject that they're interested in. It could be graded mathematically, it could be graded scientifically, it could be graded in language arts, and it could cover all the bases of all the subjects that we have if they're done well. It would be tough maybe for a high school student to pull all that off, but with a little bit of coaching, I don't see it being impossible for the at least the higher achievers, the kids who are more in pursuit of more education actively, that could be an interesting diversion in this time where we don't even know if they'll be coming to school. Keeping everything open is what we're doing. It's what I get from these directives. You know, we'll either be studying online, we'll be in the classroom every other day, or we'll be doing a little bit of both. That's telling us nothing. So it would be nice if they would just free the school districts to do what they can, although I'm sure that not all of us, even on the school board, would agree with my brilliant ideas. But it's an interesting time. Thanks, Karsten.
Yeah, and we do need to think outside the box. And so there's some variations in the schedule that could actually move towards what you're saying. But at least for now, we're thinking a 4-block. Heidi, you wrote your name? Oh, no,
Yeah,
sorry.
as long as we're
yeah, go ahead, Heidi.
as long as we're being creative. I know some conversation, at least from one Minnesota superintendent and one community member here, about re-examining the 45-15 or modified year-round schedule. Would that support educational needs better in a world that may continue to have certain health stresses in it? I mean, I would love to have a fix, but I know, and I don't want to get into it tonight, but I know that discussion is kind of percolating again as far as what's the best learning model and schedule to support all kinds of students so that we don't have these huge gaps, that kids are stay more connected because the schedule supports that and they're left away from school less. And I think people are having that conversation because they've seen kind of the stresses of distance learning. I think there've been some advantages, but I know there's also been a lot of concern about what does it really mean going forward? Are our kids up to par, or are they behind? And then what does that long-term implication mean? So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there about, we probably should be having some far-reaching conversations about, but we need to get through what's in front of us today. I get that. I just wanted to say there's a conversation starting again. So maybe we'll be hearing more.
Yep, and I do think everything has to be on the table. And maybe not significant calendar changes for this coming year, but in the future. Pam?
One of the concerns two things. One is finances. I hate to always bring that back around to finances, but we do have some parameters in which we have to remember that we have to think about what's best for student learning, but we also have to work within our financial parameters. So I'm just going to say that and throw that out there. And I know everything that we've talked about has a cost, and I know that you're working on that. So I don't need any answers on that. It's just a comment. The other thing is, when we went into distance learning in March, most of those seniors have already made plans for their post-high school career, or plans for what they're going to do after graduation. And so I'm sure that you're giving some thought to how do we help our students prepare for life outside of high school through a distance learning model. So let's, any comment on how much conversation's been had about that?
That would definitely be in the realm of our school counselors and the high school administrative team. This would be their opportunity to really revise how they do everything in their department. And, it's a big ask because they don't know if they're going to be in school or not. But assuming that we have some distance learning or hybrid, that'd be a really good time for more individual conferences, sharing digital resources and those kinds of things. Let me talk to George to see if the counseling department can put together a summary of the things that they want to do differently because of our new circumstances. Thank you, Pam. Harlan?
Yeah, I don't know, maybe I'm a little early on this, but it says structural changes and calendar. I don't know if you're going to present something on calendar, but I want to go on the record here right now as saying I think we need to look at the option of possibly delaying our start of school a week this summer. So we start after Labor Day to give us a little more time to adjust to whatever we're going to be doing. I know that comes with discussions probably with the teachers. Change the calendar is just has a lot of things to it, but I think that extra week can go a long ways for us. Instead of being one of the first schools out under the new COVID-19 rules from the governor, at least being with the majority of the other school districts on starting after Labor Day. So I'd hope we'd take a look at that option if it makes any sense.
Yeah, I'll definitely bring the subject up with the admin and teachers, just like you suggested. And, you know, I can see it both ways. Sometimes it's nice just to stay the course because people have made their plans. But at the same time, it might be nice to have an extra week or so for planning if we need it. Janie?
Well, I'm sure Arlen knows what I'm going to say, but you know, I guess I would want to be on the record that I think we should stay on because our kids have been out of school since middle of March, and I know that we do have no idea what's going to happen. So I just premised it with that. But I mean, there's so many kids that need to get back to a schedule and learning, and so I just think, if anything, we should almost be looking at starting earlier. And I just say that in the aspect of our kids have been out of school for a long time, and there's kids that need to get back to the structure and the support that they have. And Arlen, I know what your purposes are for saying that. It's not that I disagree, but I just want to bring up the other you know, option of why I believe what I do. So thank you.
All right, well, let's go to the next topic. And this one, you know, the previous talk as far as changing the schedule really, I don't think would lead to financial considerations, but the next ones will. My gut feeling is that we should keep Jefferson School for another year and convert it into an elementary school. This could be, and by the way, give a little feedback on Jefferson. I did speak with Jim Patterson, and that's one reason I was super vague in my background information, because I wanted to talk to Jim before bringing this up with the full group. You know, Jim mentioned he's very community minded, and you know, he's put some money into this planning for the purchasing of the Jefferson School. But he told, and he said I could share this. He said, you know, right now with the current agreement, it just does not make sense for him to purchase the property. You know, the numbers just don't work out. He's interested in the building. He wants to keep it as a community asset. He said that he would definitely be interested in, you know, delaying something with Jefferson for another year or 2 years, you know, however long it would take if we decide to reopen it. So he's more than willing to do that. But anyway, again, this is different than what I have wanted to do for the last couple of years. But at the same time, this might be the time to really consider something like that. In addition to that, the administrative team is very willing to convert Sunnyside, Burnside, and Jefferson, and maybe even in the middle school to K4, K5, or K6 buildings. You know, if we combine that with a strict walking zone or a change in the walking zones, you know, we could have hundreds of more kids walking to school, you know, and we'd have more families together in the same school. That would reduce the likelihood of passing on COVID to other kids. And I realize this is totally out of the blue for many of you, if not all of you. But the admin team is very serious about considering this possibility. Obviously, we want, you know, we aren't able to make those kinds of decisions, but we're willing to put in the time to determine the costs, the pluses, the minuses, and how things would work if we decided to do that. So maybe I'll take some questions and feedback right away. I know that's a huge change in what we've done for many years. And I have a couple more things to bring up after we talk about this a little bit.
You said that we'd have to look into the cost. So that was my initial question. Other than, I think it's probably one of the better solutions that I've heard. So more kids walking, again, getting back to neighborhood schools, maybe drawing communities closer together. It's got all the positives of, 1964. So it's a good idea.
Anyone else?
Can you ballpark a figure, Karsten?
Oh, well, I did some real rough thinking in my mind.
Oh, no.
And if we kept, so please, this is not a completely analyzed, price, but I would guess it's a $400,000, maybe $500,000 yearly expense, because, we would need a secretarial support. We'd need an extra nurse. We'd need at least one more custodian unless we could move, someone over to Jefferson. There would probably be need for administrative support. Doesn't have to be a principal. It could be a dean of students, or I could serve as the principal for months or a year. So it really depends on a lot of different factors, but ballpark is 400,000.
Yeah, it sounds good.
I think Arlen and then Jim.
Yeah, it did catch me off guard on this one a little bit, Karsten. I knew that in my mind that we might be experiencing difficulties trying to get this building sold, which may be a blessing at this time, if that is the case. I think at this time, the best thing would be to find a use of some sort to utilize the building, because we are going to be needing additional space somehow to get social distancing. Be it that, or if we're in a hybrid type of program and we have to look at daycare for students when they're not at school. We have the special education part of this discussion, because to be honest, online learning and that, in my opinion, is going to be very difficult unless you got somebody to encourage students that need additional help. And you could do that possibly if you had a Kids Junction type of program going during the day for the days the students are not in school, or if they're not at all, then I guess we got plenty of buildings. But I guess my biggest concern is, in order to make full use of that building, I think we would need to, maybe we don't, but we probably have to look at adding an elevator to that building. And it may or may not be needed if you can get around ADA requirements and keep everybody that has ADA issues on the lower level. We also have ADA compliance issues possibly with our restroom facilities. So those are costs that need to be looked at. But I do think if you look at Sunnyside School, half of those classrooms are extremely small, and trying to make that work at Sunnyside with COVID-19 might be very difficult. So I think there's a need for space, and I'm certainly, we made the decision to sell that building and we need to get to that, but maybe it is all right to take a look at using it for a year or two until we do it. So I patiently wait on the sidelines to see what the options are and say what I think we should do going forward at that time.
Jim?
Well, I won't say really what's on my mind about the whole process and the sale and how that went and how it ended up. I will save those comments for another time. But I will say, I'm interested to see what you come out of this with the people. If you can improve the social distancing, have another school people can walk, open up more bus space, I am not in favor of sticking hundreds of thousands of dollars into a building that we've already agreed to sell. So you can come up with something without an elevator, without all these things that structurally we have to improve a building that should have been sold and was sold, but for whatever reason he is not buying it. But I'm interested in see what you come up with. But if it's the day you're going to stick a pile of money into something, then I won't support that. But I will support looking into the option of utilizing that building if the sale falls through like it sounds like it has.
Yeah, and again, there would still, even if we put nothing into the building, there would still be money, just yearly costs, utilities and personnel. So,
right now it's 50 to 75,000. I get that part, but
right.
Let's just use Arlen's comments there, putting an elevator in and all that. I mean, you're talking, why, if we're not going to keep the building in possibly another year? So we have to weigh that out there too.
Yeah, and I don't think it would be reasonable to believe that we could put an elevator in for this coming year. So I think we would probably have to make it work and get approval, for life without an elevator in Jefferson. So like Arlen said, we'd have to have people on the main level instead of the upper level, depending on their disability.
Yeah, and I'll wait for my other comments. I don't know if this is going to come before the operation committee or to the full board down the road as to the agreement, that discussion. So
yeah, we could do it probably one or both.
Whatever it is decided.
Yeah.
So
Heidi?
I guess just how do we make the money work? We just approved a budget because we think we're going to lose kids to either homeschooling or online in schools, and maybe we mitigate that a little bit. We've talked about the dismal state budget coming ahead in front of us. So how do we even begin to bite this off, just for the bare bones of practicality here? Could you kind of explain big picture? Because this is a surprise to me. So how do we make it work?
Yeah, and there would be a significant budget impact. There's no doubt about it. And we're gonna have to make some difficult choices, between what we can do to ensure the safety of our kids when they're in person, but then we have the cost. So it's going to be a big decision. This is not an easy one. I will say, and I'm not going to promise it, but I will say that if we did keep Jefferson and made some of these changes, then it would be more likely to bring all kids, or at least the grades K through 4 in on a more regular basis if we're in hybrid. So theoretically, if we had a hybrid version, you could have half the class in one room, the other half of the class next door. Like if we did that for kindergarten, that might work, or maybe kindergarten and first grade. Of course, if we did that, then we're hurting our chances for helping with the bus count. I realize that, but then we could keep our youngest kids in the building, more regularly. So yeah, this is a big decision. And so really, I just wanted to bring it up. I think I'm getting, and we still have more questions. I'm getting a consensus that we should at least look at it. The answer might be no, and that's fine, but we should at least look at it.
Yeah, I guess I'm open to the discussion, but this is a lot. And switching the whole K4 configuration, and this would be for what, a year? Or do we think this is, I was with Jim, I understood we had a lot of investment that we would need to bring the building up to standard, and we weren't willing to do that, and we didn't have a growing enrollment. I just think it's an awful lot I mean, I get the distancing and the kids, and maybe we'd retain some kids if we could offer, you know, we have no barometer. Nobody has a good barometer on how these things are going to fall. Wow. All right. I mean, let's run the discussion or the exercise in cost benefit analysis. I just really don't know right now what's a good idea or not. All right. Thanks.
By the way, in terms of timing, you know, I've talked to, you know, people in the past about all sorts of possibilities. But it really came to head, I think, a week ago when Terry reaffirmed that, you know, we can only have 13 kids on a bus at a time. Now that might change if we require masks, maybe it changed. But you know, one thing led to another because we could change the walking zones, we can change starting and ending times, and get people to volunteer to drive. But in the end, we still have a transportation issue.
Yeah.
And that's what started thinking, well, what if we did keep Jefferson? Because we, you know, we have the numbers as far as how many kids then would be walking to Jefferson instead of the 3rd and 4th graders getting a ride all the way to Burnside, for example, for 3rd and 4th grade. And so one thing led to another, and then we concluded, well, if we did that, if we had a K4 for Jefferson, then wouldn't it be better if we had a K4 for Sunnyside, and then maybe Burnside, and then maybe Twin Bluff? So again, we're just in the preliminary exploratory phase. So, you know, because we just started earnestly talking about it last week. Yeah.
Lots to explore.
Yeah, it may come out to be that would be the worst idea, or it could come out that we're going to end up with even a better situation than we had pre-COVID. But Janie, you had a question? Janie, I think you're on mute.
Gosh, I'm still speechless, but wow. So couple things, obviously. So are you saying that Twin Bluff will be a K through 4 in addition to a middle school?
Yeah, I'm not saying anything for sure would be in a proposed plan, but we want to spend you know, a couple of weeks just analyzing everything. Really, converting Twin Bluff doesn't help us very much with the busing. You know, because it's so close to Sunnyside. Yep. So it would help some, but maybe not significantly. But we wanted to throw that in the mix along with Colville and just put it down there and just see what might make the most sense.
Well, and I love the creativity. I mean, I really appreciate it. I think this is a time things happen for a reason, and we're gonna just. I love that we're thinking really in new terms. It's just all very shocking, which is great, but. I guess a couple questions then are, I mean, what parameters are kind of when we talk about ADA and different things, like, do we have any guidance from the state or federal as far as like, are they going to be kind of letting us do things our way, or are we going to, and maybe we don't know and that's okay, but, you know, are we going to be able to be flexible and maybe not having an elevator, or, you know, or even on Mike's point of like, are people going to be able to, you know, not have the same similar benchmarks of what classes and what graduation requirements? So that's question one. And then the other question being like, are other districts, I'm sure are making these hard decisions, but are you hearing this from other school districts that they're literally really kind of having these same conversations, or are we just very unique in this like situation?
Yeah, if I could answer both your questions. The first, as far as flexibility in ADA, I'm very confident to say there will be no flexibility. I might be wrong, but you know, from what I've heard from the other governmental agencies, like those working with bus, you know, school buses, they're still following their guidelines very closely. And so I don't think there'll be flexibility. However, within the existing rule structure, you know, like Arlen said, if we kept, you know, kids on the main level, you know, who did have a disabling condition, then, you know, we could make it work. But that's that's what we've been doing for years or decades, with that particular building. But there's still steps going into the building. So does that, change things? So we would have to do a very careful analysis over the next couple of weeks. Thankfully, Kevin and Alan are on it. Kevin, is very experienced with the building and knows the people to contact and knows the questions to ask. So I'm very confident that Alan and Kevin will be able to explain where we are in terms of ADA compliance and fire marshal compliance and that kind of thing. Second question is, I have not heard, I brought it up in several different sessions in terms of changing the schedule, keeping a building, and, I brought up all those issues. I haven't heard anybody else who is this far in the process. I'm certainly not saying no one else, but I haven't heard of anyone. But we're blessed in a couple of ways. First, we have an 8-period schedule planned for the middle school and high school. That makes it a lot easier to convert to a block. If we had a 6-period day or a 7-period day, it'd be very hard to make that change. So we're lucky with our schedule. We're lucky that that we have not sold Jefferson School yet, just by chance. So we have an extra building that we already own. That's a blessing that other schools don't have. And in terms of neighborhood schools versus grade level centers, I think some schools could do that. I'm not sure if they've had a vibrant discussion like we've had for many years on that issue. So we'll see. I think Mike is next.
Carson, on that. So if you made Twin Bluff, again, as we're dreaming, so are you saying that the middle school kids and a K-4 could possibly be at Twin Bluff together? And I don't mean to, you're just still in the brainstorming.
Yeah, and that configuration wouldn't work, but maybe it would work if the middle school is a K-6 and then we just had 7th grade there. Maybe not.
Okay, I just wanted to get that in there.
Yeah, we'd really have to pencil in the numbers, and people, parents would need to have flexibility. My guess is that a lot of people would love it. If I lived, near Jefferson School, I would love to have my kids go to Jefferson School. No doubt about it. And I think the same could be true for 3rd and 4th graders who live, close to Sunnyside. I think they'd really appreciate that. Then on the other side, there'll be people who will be very upset because, some of their decision-making processes just changed overnight. So, we'll get the wide gamut of opinions on it, no doubt. And, we have to make sure that this even makes sense. Let's not jump too quickly into it. Let's do our careful analysis and see if it's the right thing to do for this coming year. Mike?
Yeah, I think everybody's going to have to get used to changing their situation and their thinking overnight. I don't think there's any way of avoiding it. The Jefferson School, it's a cost, and the cost benefit should be done. It should probably be done at a state level or a federal level in sending money to school districts that are in need of resources. People need, our elected leaders need to step up and make the decisions as to what they find being important in this country and in this state. And if education and the future leaders of this state and country are not important enough for these people, that's a sad commentary. We can borrow against all kinds of future assets to give tax cuts, but we can't invest in our children's futures that eventually they will be paying for, if that's how it works, borrowing money now for the future. But these are important investments that the state determines to make for its people. And we really need to stop talking about tax cuts and start talking about fulfilling our obligation to the future. We have been getting nothing. The only thing that we ever hear about is cutting this tax, eliminating that tax. You know, if it's, whether it's works zones or Social Security payments, everything they can do to take taxes away from the government, we've been doing for the past 30 years. And occasionally somebody comes in and raises an income tax, but I think that's far offset by all the public investment in private industry. And people have been benefiting from public investment for ages, and it's time to make a public investment in our education. That this is a sidebar to the Jefferson thing. And I understand, you know, I'm on the finance committee. I think we have a very tight budget, but it's in times like these where it's possible for the state to make an investment above and beyond what they're initially considering and actually make things work for the children of this state and not just for the people 45 and older. But I like the Jefferson idea. I think everybody would love it. Arlen wins, Janie wins. Heidi doesn't win. She never wins. But it would be a great adventure, and the cost could be borne. I mean, conceivably, the state could allow us to levy for the funding for that time, or the state could tax the money, bring the money in somehow, and figure out which school districts need it, because I'm sure we're not the only one. But it's, like I said, we're in interesting times, and we need to take innovative measures. And while neighborhood schools aren't an innovative measure, keeping our students separated and safe is something that's very new, a very new idea, and it's worth looking into. So I look forward to hearing more about it. And I'm glad I'm not you, Karsten.
Pam?
So I do have to say that I'm pretty intrigued by the Jefferson idea. I think there's a lot of benefits there, but you're just going to have to show me the money. You're going to have to make it work and justify the cost. And if we can do that, I mean, kind of echoing what Heidi said, I just am a little bit worried, not a little worried. This is what keeps me up at night. So we're going to have to figure out how to make that work financially. If you can do that, I'm very intrigued by thinking about that a little bit more. But the other thing I really want to think about too, and I'm sure you've had these conversations as well, is what is our transition plan for a post-pandemic school district? Because I don't want to be making all these big sweeping changes for 6 months, or spending all this money for grade reconfiguration and changing the bus routes. All of that costs money. And then what? What do we do next year? Or what do we do if we're only doing this hybrid thing for 2 or 3 months? And I get that you have to think about all 3 of these scenarios, which is completely mind-blowing. So I just want to say kudos to you and your team for, I mean, I can't even wrap my head around one of these plans, let alone all 3 scenarios. So well done to even be trying to tackle all of this, because I'm sure all of us, I can't see anybody's faces today, but I'm sure all of us are a little bit overwhelmed and stunned and dismayed by all of these changes that you're thinking about. So I guess I would just really encourage us all to also think about, what is our life, what does our school district look like after the pandemic? Is this the future? Are we going to spend all this money and stay this way, or are we going to do all of this work and change it only for a couple of months? What's our long range plan? I think we need to also be thinking about that.
Yeah, I think to answer your question, going in, I think the assumption is that we would revert back to our original plans before COVID hit. So the original plan is that we would have 8 periods a day at the high school, eight periods a day at the middle school. We wouldn't have Jefferson. We wouldn't have K4 buildings. That we'd revert. But I will tell you that that could be our current plan, but things change, especially as big changes are made. And I'll give you one example. And please don't, think that this is what I'm angling at, because I'm not. I'm really thinking this is a 1-year solution, and then I hope, that we have a better solution the following year. But what if the extra costs for keeping Jefferson open were paid for because in the future we have fewer transportation routes? At least mostly paid for it. Maybe that's a better solution long term. I'm not assuming that. I'm assuming we're going to revert back to our original planning because it was good planning, and I think it's going to put a good product on. But I think we always need to keep our options open because we can't predict what's going to happen 2 years from now or 5 years from now. And we owe it to the students and our taxpayers to put the best product on the table. And sometimes circumstances change. So that's kind of my roundabout answer to your question, Pam. Harlan?
Yeah. First, I kind of resent a little bit the idea that I win if we open Jefferson back up. That has never been my intent in what I've been doing. I have been trying to find the best possible use for the community, but make sure the district did not need the building before we sold it.
Yeah, you'll have to excuse me, Arlen. I was just teasing everybody.
I know, but I know that I've been a proponent.
That's true. It could be taken literally, so yeah, mea culpa.
I've been a proponent to make sure we are trying to do the best we can with what we got. I really want, in the end, for that building to be used to the benefit of our community the best it possibly can. The fact is, where we're sitting right now, we may have a need for space. We're in a situation here to deal with the COVID-19 and make the best possible education we can for our students. And if that involves using Jefferson School because the resource is there, we need to use it because we have the resource. If the building was sold, I don't advocate that we should be going out to buy another building to do something or anything, but if it's sitting there in our inventory, we got to make the best of what we got at this time. And so I'm really glad to have this put out in front of us. I think it's a lot that's going to go out to the public, and people are going to be saying a lot of stuff. I'm glad we're talking about all different options, and I'm very pleased with that. I admire administration for what they're doing right now. I would like to ask that we come back again next month sometime with a workshop. Consider that, so that the board can hear the next set of plans that are coming out. I don't know what the timing should be, but I think it's good for us to be informed, and because of the way we're doing it, it also gets the information to the public that we're looking at all our options and trying to come up with the best thing. And so thank you for looking at it. I have another great configuration a different way, but it did not use Jefferson Schools. But I'm real sad.
We'll take your thinking, Arlen.
I'm glad that you're just looking at all options and trying to make the best use of the building with what we got. And we're all looking at COVID. We're all hopeful it's done and over with quickly. I honestly believe we're going to be in this for at least the next 6 months and possibly a year until we get back to some semblance of normal. But there will not be a normal like we had before. I can see temperature testing being a norm for our school students from now on. Once COVID is done, we're still going to want to be doing that. So also look ahead where we may be going but also realizing we're making temporary changes now, and then we're gonna revert back to most of what we had before. But, thank you for the conversation tonight. I really appreciate it.
I do have one more, just to let people know, some other planning at the elementary level. This doesn't cost anything and is non-controversial, but we are planning to greatly reduce interactions between kids in our elementary levels as well. So for example, you know, we are really going to try to have kids stay in one classroom, like at Sunnyside, for example, and then we're going to work on moving teachers from class to class instead of having all the students walk through the hallways by each other and congregate. So we're going to seriously look at that. You know, of course, food in the classrooms. We're concerned about how we've been running recess because we don't want, you know, 100 kids at a time to be playing together. But we can still let, you know, classroom by classroom out for their recess, because kids obviously need to move. They need to interact with their classmates in different ways. That's an important part of what we're offering, what has to be offered for our kids. But we are looking at ways to reduce those interactions as well. And that stuff, I think, will be pretty commonplace throughout the country. And so those were the structural changes that I wanted to share. And again, you know, we don't even have a recommendation yet. You know, the school board will make the ultimate decision for those big things. But we wanted to at least present our latest thinking, and we'll move ahead with looking at some options in those areas, and we'll make the decisions hopefully in July or very early August.
Well, thanks, Carson, for running us through so much tonight. I feel like I'm drinking from the fire hose a little bit, but I know your staff and you have been doing this for a long time too. So I really, as other people have expressed here tonight, hats off to you and your admin team, because it's a lot to adjust and rethink. And I think uncertainty is the name of the game. But if we can provide some, you know, as Arlen said, the public knowing that we're doing the very best that we can, we're exploring new ideas. I think we're just being as honest as we can, and you know, we are in it together, and I'm hopeful that we'll come to some good solutions, and I'm supportive of this district moving ahead to the best of its ability. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks everyone. We'll keep you informed, and I like Arlen's suggestion. We should meet maybe the second week of July or the third week of July and focus on one or more of these areas, because we'll have a lot to decide here in the near future. So thank you. And by the way, I will pass your kind words on to the administrative team and teachers, community members who've made suggestions along the way, because it's truly school board members who've made suggestions. You know, all of, like Heidi said, we're all on the same team, and we're going to come up with something good. I have no doubt.
When is the state coming out with their July recommendations? What's that date?
They said no later than the week of July 27th. So my assumption is that it's going to be Monday through Friday, July 27th, or, you know, that week.
My thinking would be then we have some direction, we'd have a better idea to have you present something at that time instead of meeting ahead of time and wondering what they're going to do in a week or so. So that would be my thought, is to let's wait to see what they come back with and hear from how you want to handle that way, or whatever way they've decided, instead of us trying to figure out what they're going to do.
Yeah, there may be some things that, you know, have a significant lead time, so we don't have to decide everything, you know, certainly, but there may be some things that that we'll want to decide in July. So, but, you know, like you say, Jim, let's wait a little bit before we jump into a decision.
Right. No sense in jumping into a decision, then we have to change it because the state didn't go with the way we thought they were going to.
Right.
Do you think there's any way, Carson, that they're going to take an option off the table as we get closer, or isn't there any thought of that?
From what I've heard, they do not like the hybrid option. But it might be the best solution, you know, if they're forced into it. So I'd be surprised if they take anything off the table. You know, just because it's so unpredictable, and you know, everyone believes that all of our kids and staff members need to be safe. And at the same time, we want them interacting with each other at school. You know, we want two things that are opposites. And so I think we have to keep our options open and, you know, plan for using all three scenarios at some point next year.
I don't really see them changing their recommendations beyond the 3-point solution.
Yeah.
But different, you know, Minneapolis is going to be different from Marshall, you know, it's, they're not going to have any strict guidance. It should be all very flexible. Most likely it will be. And if they come up with a little money to help people cushion the blow, that would be a wise thing for them to do. But thanks, Carson, and thanks to the administration, what everybody said. It's really, it's a huge, huge undertaking. And from what I can see from this district, we're doing a heck of a job in Minnesota parlance. Yeah, great. Keep going. And we already have a special meeting in July, don't we?
We do. I can't remember the topic offhand.
Well, it's our board self-evaluation on the 27th.
That's right.
We can talk about moving that back again if we need to.
Either that or, you know, I'm usually the meeting in July is pretty short. So if we kept it really short, we could have another thorough discussion if it makes sense to do it at that time.
Right.
Well, throwing back the self-evaluation, I would not be in favor of that. We need to get to that point.
Well, maybe we can do it on the 20th. We'll have to wait and see, but maybe we'll have to also look at a different day too.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, Carson and
say-
Arlen and I can talk about that tomorrow and maybe look at some dates. Are there? Well, maybe we'll send out a Google survey or something, a doodle, to find out if there's a date that would work for the majority or all of us.
I think this whole topic we talked about tonight's probably the most important topic we have right now. So if
Agreed.
we have to push something back. We have
Yeah.
to push something back. We can't not discuss this when the time comes. And I'd be more in favor of pushing something back and talking about this on the 27th than talking about something else.
Well, then maybe we can move the evaluation up, like Carson said, with the shorter meeting in July. That might give us time to do that.
Yeah, and I think MSBA is pretty flexible right now. They have a lot of time to be able to meet at other moments, so they might be very available on the 20th. So we'll talk about it and figure it out. Arlen?
Yeah, after hearing Carson say that we maybe don't normally have a lot of stuff at our meeting in July, I'm thinking in my mind after hearing that comment that maybe an update at our regular board meeting on July 20th might, and a little bit of time dedicated to it, might take care of what we need at this time. We're going to be waiting for the governor's update, which I suspect is going to be more about procedure on personnel and odds and ends is my guess. But and I think it's important to keep the workshop schedule and not keep pushing it off. I'm not in favor of it. I think we need to carry that through. And if we have to have another meeting of all of us in a workshop, then we'll have to schedule something else besides at another time. But I think it works real good just to look at seeing what we can accomplish at our next board meeting on this and for updates. And then if there's a need, I think you and Carson can figure that out. It's not my decision as vice chair. That's your decision, Pam and Carson, to figure out when we're going to meet. in consultation with other people, so.
Mhm. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Superintendent Anderson, for a very thorough and deeply thought out conversation this evening.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that, you know, I'm the one who gave the presentation, but really it's other folks who are doing the work and coming up with a great idea. So I don't want to take credit for, you know, the work that other people are doing. So we're all working on this together.
Thanks.
Thank you, Pam.
I will
Absolutely.
make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, we
Mike.
have to do the roll call.
One more time.
Ellen? Motion to adjourn.
I,
Mike?
Aye.
Heidi?
Aye.
Janie?
Aye.
Jim?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. We are adjourned at 8:35 p.m.
See you
Thank you,
later.
everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.